Welcome to Simply Sewing with Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and over the last couple of months we've been covering patterns, how to read the back of the pattern, how to read the inside of the pattern, and what do all those notches mean. I've been working with McCall's pattern 7942. It's a learn to sew pattern, which means each pattern will teach different things within those patterns. This pattern is a three-piece outfit, and it can be made for a child right up to an adult. Last month we cut out the child's skirt, so we're going to put that together today, talk about putting the pockets on and how to do that waistband. The pants, short and long, and the skirt are considered a paper bag waistband. And that's very simply a waistband with an elastic with this tie in the front. And the tie is put on after. So last month I've taken the pattern and I've traced it out so I could use it more than once, and I've cut out the pattern pieces needed for the skirt. I am making the child's skirt, so I have a front and the back, my 4 pockets, and the little tie in the front. And these are all the units we're going to need to make that skirt. The only additional thing we're going to need is a piece of elastic. Once we have the pieces cut out and all the markings transferred onto the wrong side of the fabric, we can remove the patterns. To start with, I'm going to need the skirt front and back and the 4 pocket pieces. I can leave the tie until after. There are some fabrics that look almost identical from the front to the back. It is important that we use the same side of the fabric throughout the project. We might not be able to see it in our particular light that there's a difference, but there might be a slight difference in sunlight. So if you have a fabric that you really can't see the difference of, mark the wrong side with a pin and do that to all of the pieces. So at a glance, I know this is going to be the wrong side and the right side does not have the pin showing. This will just make sure that all of the pieces are the same way when you put it together. So the first thing we need to do is pin on the pocket pieces. With this particular pattern, both the front and the back are identical. We've had one side that went on a fold, and on the other side we have a series of dots and notches. Those dots and notches are going to help us match up the pattern pieces and help us put the placement of the pocket on. So I'm going to match right sides together, match that notch, and pin that pocket on. I do like to place my pins so that the pin heads are facing outside of the fabric. That way, as I'm stitching, I'm going to be able to remove them before my sewing machine needle gets to this pin. That dark is representing the right side of the fabric. This lighter color is representing the wrong side. So I have both of my right sides touching. When I have my pockets pinned on, I'm going to be able to stitch a 1/4 inch and stitch that pocket on. If you don't have a machine that has a mark on it, or you just want to see that mark very easily, you can use a Post-it pad to do a marking. Place your needle in the down position and then use any type of marking system and measure over from the middle of that needle over to the measurement you want. And in this case, our first measurement is a 1/4 inch. That edge of the paper is going to mark my spot. So I'm going to be able to start at the top of this pocket and stitch the entire pocket down using a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put my foot down, put my needle down, start sewing a couple of stitches, and then I can remove that pin. Continue sewing so you're following that edge of the paper. The directions say now press this towards the pocket side. But before you do that, I would recommend doing a little zigzag stitch in the same area that you did that little 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that way it's going to protect that seam from not unraveling. So set your machine to a nice little zigzag and just zigzag right along that same area. I have my 1/4 inch seam and that zigzag to finish that edge. Now I can take this fabric and press it all so that seam allowance is going towards the outside of that pocket. And we need to put the pocket on all 4 sides. One thing to look out for is make sure you don't have one of your pockets upside down. Place the two skirts together, and those pockets are going to match up along the side. On the side of the pattern, there were two more dots and a double notch. Those two double notches are going to match, and that will match the side of the skirt. So if you have a very long skirt, you might have the double notches down further. These two large circles are stopping and starting marks. The two notches are right here on the pattern. We need to stitch from the top of the skirt down until we hit that mark, then we can backstitch and stop. Skip this area, put your needle down into that large dot, backstitch, and go down. That larger dot is the middle of the 5/8 seam allowance. So we're going to stitch down here, backstitch, skip, so we're not stitching anything here, start here, backstitch, and come all the way down. That pocket opening is that little area we've left open. We can finish this pocket edge off with one row of stitching. We're going to start up at this top. We're going to stitch 5/8 all the way around and coming right to this seam, that 5/8 seam that we did, and backstitch a little bit. We don't want to go past the seam into the skirt, but we want to come right up to it. We have a nice big 5/8 seam allowance. This pocket will need to come to the front of the skirt, but we need to have these side seams open. So right at the top of the pocket and at the bottom of the pocket, we're going to just snip right to that thread. Because of that little cut right to that seam allowance, I'm going to be able to open up these seams and press them flat along the side of the skirt. So that seam is going to lay flat against the top of the skirt and towards the bottom of the skirt. And this is what this little diagram is talking about. We've snipped right to that seam allowance and we're able to press those seams open. And this is another time that we're going to be able to finish the edges. So we're going to put a little zigzag on all of these raw edges and around the pocket. Once that zigzag's been done all the way around, you can press those seams open and flat. When you look at it from the right side, underneath will be that open seam here and that open seam along the back, and there's the opening for the pocket. And that round piece is right under here. So we now have just finished a pocket. We need to do this to both the left and the right side. From here we need to do the top waistband. And on the pattern we had a couple of lines. The first one was a fold line, and then we had two stitching lines. It's asking us to take that skirt and fold it right along that line. So that first edge is going to be folded down right along that fold line. Press that seam so it's flat, and we know that we have the same measurement all the way around in the inside. Once that fold line has been pressed over, we can check and make sure that the pocket top edge is going to be covered. Once we know it's going to be covered, we can baste and hold this pocket down. So both those pockets are coming in. There's one more thing that I would do before we go to the next stage, and that's concerning this top seam. The seam has been pressed open, and when this is all done, we're going to need to get an elastic through here. However, sometimes the elastic is going to want to get caught in this little area. So I like to do a row of stitching to stitch this down so that it's not loose. With those two seams pressed down, the elastic is not going to get caught on it. With this top piece folded over, we're going to be able to take this top edge and turn it under a 1/4 inch. And that's going to give a nice finish to the inside of the skirt. And we can baste that down. We have two more lines in the top of the pattern, and those are stitching lines for the waistband. However, once you fold that top down, you really don't see those stitching lines. So for that first measurement, we can measure down and use a mark on the sewing machine. My first measurement is 1 inch. So I will need 1 inch from that needle over. We get to use the free arm of the machine now. This is considered the arm of the machine, And that way the fabric can be stitched all the way around. So we're going to be able to slide that fabric in right to our 1-inch mark. Now we can sew that first row of stitching all the way around at 1 inch. With that first row of stitching done, we still have a little bit of fabric here that will need to be stitched down. This area here needs to fit the elastic. And that second stitching line, when we turn it over, will be right along that fold where we did that 1/4 inch. Now I can stitch right along that edge. When we stitch that next row down, we're going to need to leave a little bit of an opening so we can get the elastic in. We're going to need an opening at about 2 to 3 inches. With that last row of stitching, we have that pocket stitched in. Now we can put our elastic in this little opening. The length of the elastic is going to depend on the waist that you're fitting. Have the elastic fit comfortably and then add 1 inch onto the elastic. That 1 inch is going to be an overlap. So once this elastic has been placed in, we're going to be able to overlap that 1 inch, and that gives us an area to stitch down. To thread this elastic in, let's use a good old-fashioned safety pin, and I just happen to have one. Now I can put the end of that pin through, and just by pushing that fabric over top of the pin and then pull the fabric, the elastic is going to slide in between those layers. You can feel that pin inside, so you can just keep gathering that fabric over top of the pin, hold the end of the pin, and then pull that fabric so that the elastic will go inside. Pin that elastic onto the side of the skirt, and that way you're not going to accidentally pull it right back out. Now we can just thread this all the way around. And because we top stitched these little seams down, we won't have to worry about that pin getting caught under one of those seam allowances. I've gone all the way around and I've pulled that elastic out. And by having that pin there, I know I did not lose my end. Pull the elastic out so that you have enough to overlap that 1 inch. A little zigzag on one edge of the elastic, turn the elastic over and do a zigzag on the other side. Once that elastic is attached, we're going to be able to just let it feed back inside that casing. We will need to finish off this little edge. Push the elastic so that it's out of the way and this area will remain flat. With that nice and flat, we're going to be able to start stitching right where we ended, right along that edge, coming to this edge. So that hole is going to be closed. Once that edge has been closed, we're going to be able to take that elastic and evenly distribute it around the waist. And on the outside, we have 2 rows of stitching which hold that elastic, and that pocket is perfect along the side of that seam. From here we get to put up the hem. The first thing we need to do is turn the 1/4 inch seam, and then from there, turn it to the hem size that we need. The pattern does have a recommended hem length for the size of this garment. And in this case, it's 1 1/4 inch. So by the time we turn that 1/4 inch, we're going to have a 1 inch hem. Now we get to add that little bow or that tie in the front. The tie is 1 long piece. Fold it together so right sides are inside. Start somewhere in the center. Stitch down and coming off that point. If you want a thick tie, use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you want a thin tie, use a 5/8 seam allowance. So I need to stitch down on one end, leave an opening, and stitch on the other edge. Now through that opening, I can turn this right side out. Once this has been turned right side out, press it flat, tuck in that seam allowance, do a little edge stitching just to close up that hole. This little tie now needs to be stitched onto the top of the pants or the skirt. Fold the tie in half so we can find the center fold. Put a pin to mark that center. Now we can stitch it in the center of the skirt. Be sure that elastic is even all the way around the skirt. Place the center of that tie on the center of the skirt. We want to stitch this little tie on top of the elastic. Once that tie has been stitched down, we can just tie a bow. Our paper bag skirt is now done. We have a great pocket on the side, that comfortable elastic waistband, and the cute little tie up at the top. Now this can be made in many different fabrics, but the technique's all the same. They're a lot of fun to make. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.